Welcome. Today we're going to learn how to build a sibling plot. I'm going to try to do it in 5 minutes. First, we need to lay out on the canvas exactly what we want where. This is going to prove incredibly important in order for us to have the right cohesion of our data story. So what am I doing here? I'm going to have a header. It's going to be our lead, and it's going to be sitting above both siblings. Then I'm going to have subtitles, or if I'm going to use the same measure, the same y-axis, then I might actually put in a key finding there. Below that, I'm going to have 2 different visuals. And then below there, hugging right up against the graphs, I'm going to have my footer. And then I also at this point want to make sure that I'm writing my 75-word interpretation. Why? Because if it's not traveling with the interpretation, I may miss somebody who may not be tracking what I'm sharing here. So it's always really helpful to include the interpretation. It's almost like the alt text to a image online. Then step 2 is I need to move to my hypothesis, and I want to, in the space of visual storytelling, visualize my hypothesis. So what does that look like? Well, I just basically plot things in to the frame. So here I'm going to be telling a story about public health wages. And my hypothesis is that public health wages are keeping up with annual salary trends. And so I'm gonna, on the left side, very lonely, have just a single lollipop. It's going to just extend across 25 years, hopefully. And I think it's gonna go up. I think things are rising. My hypothesis is that for the 4 public health specialties that I'm gonna choose, I think they're all going up the same. I just don't know, so therefore I'm making it a very simple hypothesis. And what I've done here too is I'm visualizing exactly what I think is going to be my story. At this point, because I know what my hypothesis is and I know what data I want to plot and also how I want to plot them, I need to choose a data source. And at this point, I need to go to an authoritative data source, and that would be the Bureau of Labor Statistics occupation and wage data set. So the last thing is we want to include this narrative. And for the narrative, we want to have several parts to it. At this point, we are also thinking about the title and the subtitle. And then we move into who is being plotted. Who are we describing here? Workers, right? And then we need to describe what is the encoding. What is taking place here? So nobody is lost. Think about it as you describing it to somebody who's blind. We need to be very explicit. And then we lead with a finding. And if we have extra space, again, just 75 words, we add another finding. And then we add a consequence. Now, if there is no consequence, it kind of falls a bit flat. So make sure we add the consequence. If not, I'm not so sure that I would go through all this effort. So then I go to bls.gov and I go to the occupation data set. And I have put the URL here, and you can look it up if you're interested to expand this visual. And so what I do is I pull out the 2025 data. I start with the most recent. And I need to use specific codes, classifications, so that I am making sure that I'm comparing apples to apples. And that is the SOC classification code, and they are listed there. Then I go back to 2000, but as it turned out for 2000, even though I could get the individual data points and the income, I was not able to get a succinct overall number for 2000. So I had to back up, and they did post it in 2001. So I need to change my plan a little bit, but this is why I'm doing the planning now. So you see, I have the 2001 actuals there, but what I'm actually doing is I'm going to adjust them into 2025 wages so that it's the same dollars as we think about for 2025. Again, comparing apples to apples. And so that is going to be done with the CPI. All right, I get the numbers, which I already have shown you, and then I plot. Now this might look very unimpressive, but at this point, just mocked up in Excel, I have several decisions I need to make. For example, I need to decide whether I'm going to accept the default lines that are just going to be placed with a lot of extra space to the left and right, or if I'm going to place them on the tick mark taking up the whole real estate of that area. I prefer the left, and then I'm going to decide whether I'm going to have the markers, that's the lollipops, at the end, or if I'm not, I prefer the lollipops. I also have to make sure that I decide what kind of a skip pattern I'm going to have on the y-axis. Am I going to have this every 20,000? Seems like an overkill. Also, can I get away with a broken y-axis so I can zoom in a little bit more? Seems to be a lot of extra space, particularly on the left, on the right side, sitting below that 60,000 mark. So if I can get rid of some of that, I'm going to do that. Then, as far as the description of the narrative, here I'm going to describe who am I plotting? Workers. What is the encoding? Well, I'm comparing a benchmark, the national trend, to public health wages, specialties. What is my overall finding? Well, the finding is that public health salaries are actually not keeping track with the trend. And is there a secondary finding? Well, I could either focus on the statisticians who are performing better than the national average, or I can focus on the epidemiologists that are doing worse than the average. And I think I'm going to lead with the epidemiologists. And then the consequence. Well, this is about value. So at this point, I start filling in my shell table, so to speak, with all the components, the text, the visuals. At this point, it's still not impressive, but I have all the elements here. Specifically now, I'm focusing on source. I want to make sure it's reproducible. So there it is. I could take this one step further and finish it, and I will. So tell us what your idea of a public health sibling plot would be. Just drop it in text below. Thanks for watching.